I am a modernist person in terms of my spirit. I'm inspired by modernism, and I'm inspired by the act of moving forward. And of course, that would clash with a lot of trads in a sense because they want to conserve or they want to hold on to a number of principles of the past. But I've never really looked at it like that. I think we need to keep moving forward, but in a glorious way. And we need to find ourselves and who we are today, not who we were. And that's why I became very excited by the modernists and the futurists, or elements of the futurists.
I started recording, so let's start then.
All right, man.
All right. Hello, everyone. So it's Existentialist Non Grata here. I always go by X. I know that I haven't posted a lot of videos. It's just because I've been preparing for a big one, and it's actually a conversational thing we're having with a artist. He goes by Fen, and you went on some magazines where that got, I think it was Raw Egg Nationalist that got you
Yeah.
big, and then you've also been on like other podcasts and such. But I actually had no idea about that, and the only way I found out about you was through mutual friends. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that's cool, whatever. And then one day I'm going through my YouTube comments and I see a comment from a few months ago and it had your name on it and it's like, fantastic video, something, something. And I'm like, wait a minute, this guy, this commenter sounds familiar. And I check out his channel and that was the guy. Like my suspicions were confirmed, and it's like I gotta talk to this guy because I feel like a lot of the things that I talk about on my channel is basically the things that he talks about through his art. So that kind of parallel there was something that I wanted to capitalize on. So that's how I was introduced to Fen. But I'm not gonna introduce. I'm gonna let you introduce you for yourself. So as you tell me, and as it says here and there on your websites and all, you started out your art life mainly in Belgium, I think. Can you kind of walk me through that? What was
Yeah.
it like, etc., etc.?
Yeah. So just to sort of rewind a little bit back, because before I came to the academy in Antwerp, I was studying at, just very briefly, at the Glasgow School of Art in Scotland. That was actually my beginning introduction into following arts and getting involved in the arts. So I went to that school for around about 1 year. I did a foundation course there, and it was an absolute nightmare because it was my first introduction, let's say, into the hyper conceptualized world of the arts, shall we say. And it was me basically coming face to face as a young, very young man, coming face to face with pretty much the most cutting edge element of the postmodern art realm. And basically, just to give you a brief idea what that is, I mean that was basically to promote that. I mean, I wanted to study sculpture, but what they wanted is they didn't really want people making sculpture anymore. They didn't really want people actually making art anymore from an aesthetic standpoint. Everything has to be a concept. Everything has to be hyper conceptual. There is no visuals, or there is no real need for visuals when everything has become pseudo-political, quasi intellectual statement in the arts. And that was basically my first year of exploring that at the Glasgow School of Art. But that was a total mess. And so what happened is I was then encouraged by some friends of the family to move over to an academy in Antwerp. And it's an academy. So it's an academy that has 350 years of lineage. And I was suggested to go there because they actually taught some of the actual founding principles of sculpture. They taught you how to carve stone. They taught you how to work with metal. They were actually spending time to actually teach you to model sculpture from the figure. In some respects, in a kind of classical, traditional way. And I'm not actually a like hyper traditionalist or a hyper. I don't come at my art, and never have really come at my art from the sense that you have to be a traditionalist. My point is that I think it's great to have a foundational element of being able to create almost anything because you've learnt from the ground principles. You've learnt how to carve stone, you've learnt how to model the human figure, and you've learnt how to inspire on the human figure, let's say. And those elements and those techniques have informed all of the work that I'm doing now, even though the work that I do spend a lot of my time on has taken the aesthetic look from early modernism, which is where I base a lot of my, let's say, aesthetic principles from, because of its raw energy. I'm very much inspired by, when I say early modernism, I'm talking about sort of 1870 to 1920, 1930. As generally after that period, things started to degenerate quite heavily
Mm-hmm.
in the arts. But I think it's that element that I'm attempting to do, and this is early days, but I'm attempting as a sculptor to look back to go forward, but not too far back. It's not the element of, you have a lot of trads online who are, they constantly say, oh, we need to go back to Renaissance. We need to go back to 1500s, 1600s. And they have this romantic idea that somehow if we just return, this return meme, if we just return to the kind of Renaissance period, that everything will be saved and everything will be fine. But I don't come at it from that element. I am a modernist person in terms of my spirit. I'm inspired by modernism, and I'm inspired by the act of moving forward. And of course, that would clash with a lot of trads in a sense, because they want to conserve, or they want to hold on to a number of principles of the past. But I've never really looked at it like that. I think we need to keep moving forward, but in a glorious way. And we need to find ourselves and who we are today, not who we were. And that's why I became very excited by the modernists and the futurists, or elements of the futurists and the vorticists, who had this idea of you propel yourself forward with this act of glory and strength and power and vitality, and you will continually find yourself anew in the future. But holding on to the past is holding on to a kind of nostalgia. Even though I look back, I think it's important to look back, but we need to look back and grab something and run forward with it. And that's kind of my entire thesis now, is I look back at those early periods, and it's trying to find something of who we are now and where we're going. But that's not easy. That's not easy to do that, because what I'm asking of myself and also other artists around me is to not just dwell on what happened in the past, but also find out what's the current. Where are we in this place? Where do we find ourselves in this period? And of course, that's what's ultimately driven me to look at our time now artistically, this postmodern or post-postmodern, or this age that we're in now. What is this age even? It's like, where do we find ourselves now? What are the art movements that are going on? Majority of them are entirely degenerate. They mean nothing. They go nowhere. And I'm still trying to kind of reconnect, rekindle, find something of the spirit of man today. And I believe that spark was last seen in, 1870, 1920, 1915, 1910. It was still there. Even though things were hyper modernizing artistically, there was something there. There was a spiritedness that we've lost. And I believe that in the arts, or I believe it's the artist's goal or his journey, is important to be able to rekindle that flame in the
Yeah.
period we are now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think what you're really approaching at is, that quote, standing on the shoulders of giants, right?
Yeah.
Where it's
Yes.
like, yes, you can look far and you can look far over the horizon. You can see a lot of stuff. You can gain a lot of knowledge from that far-sightedness because you're so high up. But you cannot forget that you're standing on the shoulders of giants, and it's almost like having that wealth of knowledge and having that wealth of the foundations allows you to say, okay, what can I do with that? But then now we have almost in some sense because we have the postmodernists have broken from the past. In some sense they are more free to do something, but they do not have the power to apply that freedom because they do not have the wealth of knowledge, right? That's the fundamental idea that so many philosophers around that time that you mentioned, where it's from that bridge between the modernists to the postmodernist part, right? When the zeitgeist was transitioning, so many philosophers were having that kind of mindset, right? So Nietzsche and Spengler would be some key examples, right? Nietzsche didn't say, okay, you're gonna go straight to the. Nietzsche has this. Nietzsche is one of the most easy to grasp foundational concepts, is like the 3 stages of the camel, lion, child, if you know, right? And basically, the camel is something that learns, he studies, and he serves in servitude to the traditions, and then the lion breaks out in rebellion, and then finally the child is able to create something, not just rebel, not just say no, but to say yes. But you cannot say yes if you have not said no, but you could only say no to something if you know what you're saying no against. And I think that's kind of what you're going at, where it's like, yeah, you want to create something applicable to the modern era, but I'm sorry, applicable to today, but you want to have something that can actually last, right? You want to have something that like actually means something, but to do that, you have to know, you have to have that kind of wealth of knowledge to build off of, to apply in your way. The postmodernists, they have that freedom to apply in their own way, but they don't have anything to apply with, right? It's like a much more simple way to put it is, like, you might have the freedom of speech, but you do not have the power of speech. I can say whatever I want, but I don't know what to say. And I think that is the fundamental crux of your, let's say, crusade here, right? You have this pursuit of saying, look, art today, it lacks a lot of meaning. And you could say, look, art is subjective, yeah, but like, some things in art are less subjective than others. If I look at a pie of bricks, or a pie of poo on the ground, if I think it's great, yeah, you can't say no to that. But there's no denying that there's not a lot of substance there, right? And you kind of mentioned it's like, so art today is like hyper conceptual, and for those who are wondering what that means, what Fen I think is saying is like, it's supposed to like represent like, oh, so money on the ground is supposed to represent the toils of the working class, and it's so absurdly conceptual that it's just ridiculous at this point. And we'll unpack that. That's kind of what I want to unpack, right? Because why is it that art today, it has the freedom to express whatever it wants, and yet it doesn't express anything? And then does that mean that like your way, which is to respect the past, and then have the agency to say, okay, we're gonna pick and choose to see what fits the zeitgeist? And I think that is the crux of what you're going at. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way you have to look at today's postmodern context in the arts, shall we say, is, well, I mean, ultimately, if you were to really label it, it's postmodern contemporary art. That's where we are on a visual standpoint. What does that manifest as? Well, majority of the time, it manifests as identity politics. It manifests as relating to gender, relating to race, relating to some kind of political trend at the time. It's basically using art as protest. It's using art as a kind of it's become so hyper political and so kind of based on very petty ideas, not eternal ideas, not ideas that speak to the timeless or the eternal, but ideas that speak to the very kind of petty material elements of life. So there is a complete disconnection to the divine. So you completely cut out this element of the timeless or the divine or the spiritual even. So what you end up having is a kind of hyper materialist arts trend and movement that is parasitic. It's everywhere now. That is nihilistic, and it ultimately preaches nihilism. And the elements that you see or the trends that you see from an aesthetic standpoint for this postmodern contemporary art is, as you say, a pile of bricks on the floor or a pile of bricks with some paint thrown on it. And it's all this kind of, well, it doesn't matter what it looks like. It's the idea that counts. And we make it up as we go along. And these ideas are constantly changing, and there are no foundations. So it's ultimately it's this deconstructionism. It's this constructivist philosophy that came in 50s, 60s, 70s, and has really just absolutely powerhoused through our, Western world, shall we say. It's very much a European grammar or Western grammar. And it's eroded the foundations, very much eroded the foundations of principally, I believe, who we actually are. And we don't really know who we are anymore. So my attempt is to look at art not that far back. Let's say, when I mention early modernism, I look at that kind of art because it still has a very strong visual, and it has a very strong direct graphical visual representation. If you look at the futurists, it's extremely graphical from a drawing standpoint, but also from a sculptural standpoint. And what I found wonderful about these movements and why I felt they were important to look at, firstly, they were short-lived. They were killed off by the wars, but they were basically absolute vitality. They were absolute energy being realized as form in sculpture and in painting and in drawing. And I look at them because I see that kind of expression, that primitive. It is relatively primitive. It's not hyper refined, but it has a primitivism that is so vitalistic and so direct that I see it as a counter to the if you imagine that the world that we're in now is a vacuum, and it's a vacuum of all vitality. I mean, I think society today has, in many respects, attempted to occult vitality. It's attempted to hide that energy, that power, that strength. It doesn't want that energy in the arts because, well, I believe that the status quo actually sees how dangerous art actually is, because the art ultimately speaks to the dream world, the dreamscape within the human mind. And I suppose that's what has ultimately triggered me as a sculptor, is that realization of just how powerful art is, or just how sort of dangerous and punk sculpture can be when you create something that is unapologetic and that it's expressing a vitality and a strength and a power in this cultural dark age that we find ourselves in. Making the art that I make, it triggers a lot of people. People don't like it. They become quite upset about it, especially the sort of postmodernist types, because it's an unapologetic expression of vitality, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
And my belief is that art has the ability to empathically speak to human beings. And, to cut a long story short, I gave up on the idea of politics or the idea of the political side of things speaking to man, because I don't think politics today, or politics of where they've gone today, really speaks to the spirit of man, but art does. And that's what I find super, super exciting about culture and about being involved in music or film or sculpture or painting, is that if we can get back to real culture, real vitalistic, strong art, strong culture, then it will simply be unstoppable, because it's that sort of energy that taps into a deep part of the psyche of man, and you can reinvigorate, and you can bring an energy to people that will awaken them to what's going on today. But you have to understand, because people think like, no, that's not true. But let me say this: if you look at the art that I'm making in my own small, basic, primitivistic way, if you look at how they've attempted to occult the art that I make, the institutions have turned their backs on me. They don't want the art that I make, and they don't want artists like me to make the art that I'm making. They want zombified followers. They pay off these zombified artists who simply make and regurgitate propagandistic art that just carries on the status quo. They don't want strong, unapologetic art. When I made or have made these monumental stoneworks, and I've made these monumental bronze works, you have people who are connected to institutions who come to me and they say, but the art that you're making is fascistic. They get very upset. They get very, very upset. And it's quite funny, because they use the word fascistic, or they use that word fascism. And I think to myself, what exactly are you even saying? Because the work that I'm making, first of all, is not at all something that fits within the very, at times tight kind of right-wing traditional art. It's the stuff that I'm making is
Transcends
very
that.
much,
It transcends that.
well, it goes beyond that.
Yeah.
But what you see is, you see these people are, they're becoming upset. They're becoming very upset by, there's something in it, and what they don't like is, they don't like the confidence of it. They don't like the strength in it. They
Mm-hmm.
don't like the directness of it, the primitive element of it, and there's masculine elements of it as well. And you see it challenges them, because it doesn't fit with the postmodern ideal that, we should just be all nice and cuddly, and the masculine energy doesn't exist, and we're all just sort of going along to get along, and it's all friendly, and let's just focus more on the identity politics trends and all that kind of nonsense. So my belief is this: is that the only way out of where we are today culturally is through art, is through strong art, through music, through film, through painting, and it's currently my mission is to, alongside other artists, is to bring about a direct opposite, from a cultural perspective, not a political movement. I'm not interested in making
Mm-hmm.
a political arts movement. I've got no interest in that, and in fact, I'm not interested in having political artists even on board. Thankfully, the artists that I'm currently connected with have kind of transcended the political side of things, because I don't believe that politics has the answers in art, because it ends up becoming propagandistic,
Mm-hmm.
and that always fails. But it's my mission now to find other artists, build a movement, and push forward as a direct opposite to what's going on today. And that will start just in the early stages, just online. But in time, when we can start gathering enough support and enough believers in strong culture again, as I said, I believe wholeheartedly that it's through culture that real movements and real change will happen, and it will be unstoppable, because it speaks to a much deeper part of the human psyche, much deeper than politics will ever touch.
Yeah. Yeah. I always said that politics is it's a it's a yeah, I always said that politics is almost like a degenerative form of art, where it's artistic, but it has like such a narrow limitations on it. You mentioned three things that I want to touch up on, right? You mentioned first, the art that you like, whether it's futurism and other modernistic art, is it speaks to something primitive, but it's something that's almost universal, right? And that's what you call the divine
Yes.
timeless, right? That's the first thing that I wanted to say. The other thing that you wanted to say is art today is not dangerous, and your art is dangerous. And you kind of related that to the badness of postmodern art in the movies and the music, etc. And the third thing that you wanted to say is the answer, right? That you talked about is the answer, right? How culture is the answer. I want to touch upon all three of them, but I want to start with the. Well, I could start with any of them because they're all so interesting.
You choose.
Yeah, I'll choose. The one of the things that you said is, listen, postmodern. One of the reasons why you said postmodernism art is bad is because it says nothing. And I'll tell you what, right? I still maintain that there are rebellious elements in both modernism and postmodern art. Except here's the difference, right? The reason why postmodern art is bad is because it has lost this point of reference, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned how it's like art today, it only speaks to the current thing, right? It's the current thing, and it's if once that current thing passes, then it's time to rebel against the next current thing, and rebelling against the old current thing is it's out of touch now. Get on with the times. And so it kind of lost its point of reference. And I think for me, rebellion for rebellion's sake, right, which is postmodern contemporary art, is not interesting, right? And a great way to conceptualize this, right? Great way to kind of like internalize that kind of line of thinking is, well, think of it like this: the middle finger is only as interesting as the thing it is pointing at, right? That's how I would frame it, right? It's the middle finger is only as interesting as the thing it is pointing at, right? If you point the middle finger at at a monarch, that's a big deal. If you point it at I don't know, the employment policies of a small business, it's not gonna ruffle a lot of feathers, right? So, and it's a lot much like it reminds me of like a Dostoevsky novel called Demons, right? Where it's like you've had this generational differences in the manifestation of liberalism, right? Where the son of a conservative was very liberal, but his policies, his goals were very concrete. We have to change this, we have to reform that, and we have to let go of that. But then his son, well, because his son was working off of the work of his father, it had no point of reference that he was rebelling against, because the conservatism was kind of beaten by his father. So then it's like the socialist son, which came after the liberalist father, kind of just broke things down for the sake of breaking them. And that's how it went in the novel, right? Tradition was kind of broken down. Yeah, so the modernists broke down tradition, parts of tradition, because it was obsolete, right? Infamously, Marinetti would say, we're down with the museums and such, right? It was...
Sure.
It was, tradition was broken down because it was obsolete. It was overcome by the new and improved, and so the old was replaced by the new and daring, which is, I think, what you want to go. You are daring, dangerous, and why it's dangerous, I'll get into it. But now the newness, it doesn't need to dare, because the daring, it's like how you have to work hard to like make a living, and then once you set yourself up for success, your son just needs to continue that. It doesn't have to go through that struggle, right? And so rebellion kind of dies without an establishment. So it has to keep making a new establishment, right? It has to keep making a new enemy, the new established boogeyman that we're rebelling against, or we're protesting against. And the more fabricated the rebellious event becomes, the more fabricated and fake your art becomes. And I think that's why it's so bad here, where it's, and you kind of mentioned, movies are bad too. When was the last time you saw a movie that was good? I don't know about you, but like with books, there are books where it's like, damn, that was a masterpiece, and it could be just like the medium where the movies are like, that was good, and then you forget it. It's like eating restaurant at a 5-star rest. It's like eating food at a 5-star restaurant where it's like, that was
Yeah.
good, and then you forget it the next week, right? And that's when that's movies at its best. At its movies
Mm.
now, on average, like how many Marvel movies are they gonna make? It's the recycled same thing, and people still cry and brawl over it. Oh, that was the best movie ever. Oh man, it was the most ambitious crossover ever. It is so bad.
Yeah.
And music too. Part of the badness of it is it's fabricated. It's a corporate yeah, it's a corporate product, music and movies. And I kind of wanted to touch up on art. When I say art, yeah, dance. When I say art, yeah, movies, music, yes, that is art. But when I say art, I'm also talking about painting, sculptures, dancing, I guess, where I think those types of art really has potential for what you're doing. Why? Because of something called the lack of overhead costs, right? When you create a movie, you gotta go through a lot of budget, a lot of producers. You get like that board of directors vibe. But with dancing, with painting, with sculptures, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not an artist. So, but it, like, from the looks of it, it looks like you just need skills and imagination. The budget for it is not a lot compared to like a budget, like compared to the
Yeah.
budget of a movie. So in this
No,
sense,
absolutely.
yeah. So in this sense, like what you're doing is a lot like entrepreneurship, right? And so, that's kind of what I was getting into. Um, do you have anything to say about that, or do you want me to get into the dangerous aspect of it?
Well, I mean, I think obviously when you look at music and you look at, I mean, not all music, but if you look at the mass-produced music of today and the film world, shall we say, these are mass arts. These have, really huge budgets behind them, and film has always been known as the mass art. It's really to convey and speak to the mass mind. And of course, the mass mind of modernity or the mass mind of today is pretty terrifying. Actually, it's usually quite spiritually devoid. I would just to also go back to what you were saying about the sort of current art scene. I think what's ultimately also missing in the current art world is the importance of aesthetic and the visual expression in art, which is lacking today, because there
Mm-hmm.
is no real honest, you know, should we say, visual expression of art today, which is why I have often called for. I made a Twitter thread about it a while ago now, where I spoke about what could be the next major visual arts movement from a sculptural perspective, because I think it's important that aesthetics and style are, you know, are backing up a series of metaphysical ideas. The problem today is you have the metaphysics of the postmodern age, and the ideas are packaged in very, very poor aesthetics. So what you end up having is a deeply, deeply unspirited, lacking of energy, lacking
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
vitality art movement that when you go to an arts exhibition today, you don't feel energized. You feel confused and you feel de-energized. You feel demoted. Like you have no motivation after seeing this sort of work. It doesn't connect to anything. I mean, you mentioned that there's this kind of lack of connectivity with the art today, or you were sort of referencing that in the culture today. It's like this thing I often say. It's like you make it up as you go along. At least early modernism still had a connection to tradition. There
Mm-hmm.
was
A point of
tradition that
reference.
a point of reference. Absolutely, there was still a connectedness to these painters and sculptors of that time. They could still make things, and you
Mm-hmm.
can't even say that today. You don't even have the hand of the artist in the majority of the work. No one can really paint these days. No one can really sculpt these days. And that's a very vital and important part of art, is that it must be made by the artist. You know, it's but I look at art in quite an esoteric sort of way, in the sense that an idea is in the, let's say, in the darkness of the artist's mind, and he channels, or she channels, that energy into a material, into a painting, or into a piece of stone, or clay, or whatever. And it's from that darkness into the light that essentially an artist is someone who is talking to or expressing the mass mind, or the mass subconscious mind of a people. And when the artist makes that work, it's then exhibited, and people recognize their spirit or something of themselves in that work.
Yeah.
You see, the artist is a channeler. The artist is someone who channels a force or an energy. An artist speaks to the archetypes. An artist, that's what he should be doing, is speaking to the eternal and the archetypes, and then showing that those forces even exist. You know, the artist makes a piece of sculpture or a painting, and he casts that spell, that visual spell, into the world. And people become energized by that, and they become motivated, and they become, you know, if you see great art or you're exposed to great music, you become energized. Sometimes you feel even invincible, or at least I do when I see great work or hear great music. And it's that effect that is ultimately very dangerous. To go on to what you were saying before, there is danger in inspiration, because if you inspire, the most powerful force is to bring inspiration to someone. If you inspire, then you get the you end up getting the snowball rolling, and it starts off small. But when someone is inspired, or you have a series of artists who are inspiring others, it starts off as a small snowball, and it turns into a giant, absolutely massive, colossal snowball at the end, which has some real force. And that's inspiration, because it's the lifeblood and the life energy that propels someone to do something or push forward in life. But we live in a state of anti-dynamism. They don't want inspiration. They want to disconnect you. And you see, that's why I'm just making that sort of clarification here, building on what you said before. It's like, now is a period of you make it up as you go along. There's disconnected. There's no point of reference. But if you look at art that's honestly made and connected to the eternal or the timeless or the archetypal, then it speaks to people, because there's something in it that they recognize. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're saying for sure. Have you ever I don't know if you read a lot, or if you're in, I mean, I assume that you're into other artists, right? So that's it doesn't matter. Have you ever had a situation where you read the Wikipedia page of an artist, and then instantly you say, wait a minute, I want to know more about this guy, right? There's something about what he did in his life that kind of speaks to you, right? And for me, I'm listen, man, I'm very ignorant on the specifics of art history. So for me, it was on different literature authors and philosophers, right? So if I read something like Mishima or Ernst Jünger, right? Here's what he did. He illegally went to Africa by joining the French Foreign Legion, and then he was sent back because that was an illegal act. I'm like, wow, that's adventurous. And do I speak French? Nope. Have I ever been to Africa? Nope. Have I ever been to Europe? Nope. But then I know I can identify something in there that's like, you know what? I gotta read more about this guy. And I think that is what you're trying to get at. Just even in a short blip, right? Even in a short citing, a short reading, a sentence, one painting. That's all it takes for you to say, ha. I identify something there, and it all happens subconsciously. I don't consciously. Well, there's the adventure in his Ernst Jünger's travels. That's definitely what I want to go into. No, it's just like it's something that goes faster than your rationalization, which I want to get into later. But I'll start on the danger part, and I think I know why. You kind of hinted at why it's so dangerous, all right? Why is it dangerous to inspire? Why is it it's dangerous to be bold, be daring, have, vitality? Well, because it's potential to go against the status quo, right? I'll tell you what. Um, it's there's so many parallels between the art and life, right? Life imitates art imitates life 100%, because um, we talk about how like modernism still stood for something, and then postmodernism, it stands for nothing. Um, but then um, so there is that, like, it has to have something, like the modernism for it has to necessarily stand for something. Without that, it wouldn't have existed. But then for postmodernism, you kind of make it up as you go along. There's this observation that I've always um, noticed, and this is gonna get into a bit social political, but I want to divorce that from art. I want to make it clear that, like, it's just a parallel that I'm seeing. I'm not, um, transferring the two together, making it saying it's exchangeable. It's not, but it is a parallel. It rhymes. Okay, so I've noticed that in a lot of safe societies, secure societies, not a lot of foreign threats. That's where you see the most hatred against so-called toxic masculinity. It makes sense though. It 100% makes sense, right? And I kind of dug into that, right? I kind of like thought about it a bit, and um, I've concluded that it makes sense that if your society is under threat, then you need a strong defense, right? Whether it's, you usually in the form of a military or something like that. You need some kind of a strong defense, and you have to promote courage. You have to promote certain degree of violence, and traits like that, dangerous traits, right? Why? Well, because your enemy is more dangerous, is more unpleasant, so you make that sacrifice and say, okay, you know what, soldiers are violent, they can use that violence against me, but I'm gonna I have to make a compromise. I have to say that uh um I have to make that compromise and put my trust in violent people on my side rather than violent people on the other side. But then when the other people's side goes away, so when violent people on my side wins, well, the people that have defended me now becomes a threat, right? They become the only threat. So that's why it's dangerous, right? I guarantee you there was a time when your art would have been praised because we just need violence and danger in society when we are, as a society, are endangered. And that is so interesting, and why I kind of mentioned the political there, because something like liberalism, right, where it seeks safety from the illiberal elements of the world, oppression from kings, right, was the classic example during the French Revolution. It eventually, after it got rid of the kings, then it got rid of other illiberal ideologies. Once that was done, and the world came to resemble like Francis Fukuyama and end of history kind of vibe, like in the 90s, the one enemy that liberalism had was itself, right? And so we had to it's so interesting that we went from protecting ourselves from our enemies, and then we protect ourselves from ourselves, and suddenly you have a emphasis on public health, public safety. I'm not gonna get into specifics, but you can kind of catch on here, and
Absolutely.
yeah, and we've gotten to a point where in an era when threat to public safety is put above personal liberty, public danger becomes the only way to overcome personal imprisonment, because the inclination for danger represents chaos. But that inclination for danger is daring. It is vitality, right? And so in safety, right, in a state of safety, in our safe spaces, everything is predictable, which is the very definition of order and uniformity. And you need predictability if you have pursued a state of security, because if you pursue a state of security, it allows the weak amongst the society to survive, and that kind of allows it kind of requires more safety, and so the cycle continues. But danger, right? Danger is chaos. It's unique and it's unpredictable controllable. And that's why danger is liberation from the very liberalism that seeks safety above all else, right? And so I think, you kind of mentioned there has to be some kind of eternal, you have to invoke something eternal. And I think that is so true. You know why? Because in our lives, our privacy, our material possessions, our bodies are becoming increasingly out of our control. But the spirit within, that's gonna be the last stand between tyranny and freedom. And so I always say that the final enemy of liberalism is within, and the last stand of freedom is man's spirit. And in a world where public safety does not involve just physical but emotional comfort, what counts as dangerous to the system is comically low. And this in and of itself is dangerous, and that's all the more advantageous for the free spirits of a rebellious bent, right? And so for the system the system has become an eggshell now, and one small step into the abyss, and the system comes crashing down. I always say that Babel, the Tower of Babel, it doesn't need the divine intervention for it to fall. It was gonna fall under its own weight because it was so high up that the chaos would just make it fall. And the system knows this.
Yes.
Right? That's why it's gonna get into what you said here. That's why they take great measures to ban artworks not deemed to be appropriate, because it's dangerous.
Yes.
They take great measures to erase history considered inconvenient because it's dangerous. Right? They dictate what you can and can't say, what you can and can't do, because in danger lies freedom, and in freedom lies danger. Freedom is inherently dangerous, and danger is inherently free. So I think that's why your work is so important. I know you are you got so much to say. You're jumping up and down in your chair there. So have at it. What do you say?
Well, it's actually really amazing because I don't even know where to fully start because you've thrown so many ideas into this. But it's like
also now you know how it feels like, eh?
Exactly. Well, it's funny because you actually summarized beautifully exactly where we stand on a societal level, but you've beautifully taken the archetypal elements of what our current society has attempted to do or attempts to do at every possible show or every possible showing or expression of strength. It's like, as I said before, the current society has actually attempted to occult the vitalistic. It's attempted to occult the masculine. It's in this kind of safety spiral of eating its own tail. It's the snake eating the tail. It's going into into this sort of never-ending sort of nonsense, which will eventually it'll burn itself out. It's like, as I've referenced before, it's like society is deeply sick and it has a fever at the moment. I don't look at society as being, particularly healthy or well, but it's a spiritual kind of illness as well as it is a physical one. I feel like society needs to sweat this out before there will be any real major revitalization of these important principles, because the mass are bewitched by the current system that we find ourselves in. They are utterly under the spell of it. But it's like you say, in time, or rather, the cracks are showing. It's this kind of it's becoming so evident now that there's this sort of weakness, and the system requires so many levels and so many tiers of propaganda to even stop these expressions from coming through. And most of the time these expressions are cultural. They're either curtailing or heavily arresting free speech, or it's from the visual, where they will try and stop certain art from being displayed or expressed. And they don't have to do it in the sense of sending police to your house to arrest you. The media is so controlled they'll just never show you, or the arts institutes are so controlled they'll try their best not to show you. They'll try and starve you of oxygen, because it's that mention of true, like, unapologetic expressions in the art are dangerous. But it's dangerous on many levels, as you've mentioned. It's dangerous because even just to push out and actually make something opposite to where we are today is a sort of a, in some respects, a dangerous act. But it's also dangerous to the system itself. It's dangerous in the sense that it will potentially counter what's going on, and you can't have that level of culture going on in a society that is constantly trying to wrap itself in cotton wool. I think it was really great what you mentioned, where you said that throughout this sort of like liberal spiral that we've been going through, it's like the society tries to continuously look for another enemy, and it's in that doing of looking for another enemy, or looking for the next danger, or looking for that fascist hiding underneath the bed, or looking for that Nazi around the next corner, which simply don't exist. Even it's utter nonsense that they're constantly looking for the next enemy to point at. But I think there's a lot of energy in that. There's a lot of it. For me, it's very exciting because it's like, isn't it great to be the enemy? Isn't it great to be the target? Because that, like, when a society or when a culture starts to point a finger at me, or when institutions point a finger at me, or artists like me and call me, you know, I don't know, fascistic or whatever nonsense they throw at me for making unapologetic art, you become empowered, because the energy that comes with that is, well, for me at least, is it's a red rag to a bull. Because when you become cancelled, or when they try to cancel you, it gives you even further energy to keep going, to keep pushing forward. And other artists, I think, will find that in time, that as they come out and as they start to show their art on social media, or show another way, they will attempt to be cancelled, but it's through being cancelled that actually limitless energy flows through you. Because as the enemy, as the person that is the bad guy, well, you're not really the bad guy. In many respects, you're taking on the archetype of, or at least attempting to be the hero. There's so much energy in that, and I really want other artists to connect with that and to feel that, because it's like, I think you really summed it up so beautifully, in that sense that this system, it's falling, and it's dying, and they're going to keep on pumping drugs into it. But we know, I know, probably all of your listeners know, this can't go on for too much longer. In the end, there is a natural force that will break through, and it'll be like a dam breaking. And that energy will flow through our societies with such an explosive manner that we won't even ourselves be able to fully know what the hell's going on. Because it's like you can't keep that power back for too long.
Yeah.
Because nature always finds a way. A river always finds a way in the end. Even if it is the dam that eventually gets completely destroyed. So that's the way I look at it from a spiritual standpoint. Is I don't want, because a lot of people become black-pilled in this time period that we're in. They think like, oh, this is never going to end, but it will. It will end eventually, and there will be that epic moment of something very vital that will take its place, because that's how the pendulum swings. That's how the cultural pendulum eventually swings. So I think it's that from that Evolian standpoint, to be able to look at the time we're in, where we are in now, and it's a meme, but you kind of ride the tiger, you ride the process of where we are. But as long as you keep on building, and as long as you keep on creating, you'll get through it. You will pass through this stage. Anyway, I've kind of waffled on a bunch of
No,
stuff there, but
no, no.
the ideas that you put
Yeah.
forward were very exciting for me to hear.
It's also so great that we've ended on like such a uh positive note, because well, it is almost nearing the hour. So I kind of wanted to finish this off, because so I kind of said my glancing, you said your glancing, right? And now I'm just like slowly like bringing it, like let's bringing it down, cooling it down, and it's like the conclusion. It's like the epilogue after the big grand finale. And I think, yeah. So I think, number one, it cannot be contained. Number two, so yeah, they cannot stop you forever is one part of the good part, right? Like what they cannot do. But we also have to talk about what you can do. And you talk about, having that faith in the fact that, like, your power cannot be canceled forever. Right now, it's only gonna give you that anti-fragile state of just giving you more power. But I also wanna put it in a more positive note. And when I say positive, I don't mean more uplifting. I mean in the additive note, like something like above zero, like pause, like above zero kind of thing, where it's like there's actually something there. And it's how you approach things when you do things, right? When you go about your day, do you think about what you do, or do you think about the substance behind the appearance? And that substance that you said is what we all strive for. When we go into the art museum, we're energized. It's because the substance came. If the fact that I go to an art museum or an art exhibition and there's a pile of bricks, and the fact that it doesn't speak to me, is actually not the fault of the pile of bricks. If those pile of bricks could convey adventure, daring, power, it would have been great. I would have been happy. So it's like the appearance is almost like a means to an end. And if there was a great sculpture, a great painting that was full of speed, like imagine if it depicted a very fast airplane, and if it was unable to convey the speed, convey the power, then it's not gonna leave me feeling energized. And so I think, and this is just for artists, right? This is for writers. Well, when I say this isn't for artists, this isn't just for painters and sculptors and things like that. It's for writers, it's for readers, it's for thinkers, it's for talkers. All of those are art. And I think you have to remember something, right? Just it's a bit corny, but like I've been like going through like my notes, and I kind of stumbled upon a poem I wrote. I thought it would be fun to just finish it off. It is, yes. Is it corny? Yes. But like I have to do the shameless plug here. So
Go ahead, man.
yeah. So then then it's like a great epilogue to the hour-long thing. So yeah, intellectualism and the ideas that spun the wheels of history, the glories of the past directly passed down through generations, down through stories of old, and told they were through word of mouth. But let it not be forgotten that there was that made it remembered, that before the pen there was the sword, that before the word there was the act. There was the moment, then and only then came the interpretation. Yes, before matters of facts, there were matters of the heart, and whatever we know, it was once felt. It was this that made them treasures to be remembered. It was this that made them worthy of being preserved. They rest peacefully in the museums and libraries, a calm sanctuary for what was once vibrant and alive. But it was precisely movement that made them treasures in the first place. Its name, its exact meaning, and the rational explanation came second. After it reckoned, after it moved, and after it shook the world and made history, the stories we tell is itself an irony. For whatever is told of was never spoken into being. It was never born out of careful deliberation. For the tedious thought necessary to articulate appeared long after the moment, and by then the magic has already passed. In times when there was movement in the zeitgeist, when the phenomenon was still too new to be corrupted by words, when it was pure action, that was where life was found. In the heat of things, this is where new life is made. And then and only then, after the fact, after the moment, did the masses seek to comprehend it through words. And this they call purity, and this they dare call wisdom, and this I call an all-too-human tragedy.
Hey, very sweet, man. Like that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well done with that.
Thank you. I'm kind of proud of it. do I have am I a bit embarrassed that I said it? Yeah, but I think it's a wholesome embarrassment that I've recited a poem to an artist I'm a fan of.
I thought it was good,
Yeah,
man.
it was good. Yeah, so we're near the end of the hour. Um, so thank you for thank you for being on here. I appreciate it a lot.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it was great. It was great, and I think we've touched on a lot of key concepts, and we had a very productive conversation in the sense that we were uh hitting each other's notes, we were resonating with
Absolutely.
each other. I think that was great. So
Definitely.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'll put all your work links in the bio description so that the people, my small subscriber base, can follow you. And
Sure.
I hope like like keep up the daring, keep up the action, just keep up the fight. Um, yeah, I'm very optimistic after this conversation. So thank you.
That's great, man. Well, thanks so much for having me on, X. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you.